Are you finding property investment a little bit slow? Maybe you're not making the progress you've wanted to make. Well, joint ventures may be the answer. So this week on the Property Podcast, we're going to look at the recipe for a successful joint venture.
Yep, this is the Property Podcast, episode 226. I am Rob D here with Rob B. We're each going to be bringing our own unique combination of skills to this podcast to hopefully come up with something pretty strong. We've got a lot to say on the subject of JVs. You might want to be taking notes for this one. We've also got a cracking resource of the week and a very interesting news story. So there is a lot to pack in, but just before we get to all that, Rob, good news, another freebie.
Yeah, so many people in the property industry are going to start hating us soon. We're giving away more free content. Yes, we've got another course on the Property Hub. We're churning them out at the moment. And this course is which strategy is right for you. Go and have a look. We've been updating the courses recently. Keep your eye on them. We'll let you know when new ones come out, but we're also in the process of updating some of the older ones, so go and check those out too. But if you haven't looked at any of the courses, you must be bonkers. People charge for this type of stuff. Completely free, no catches, no upsell. Go to thepropertyhub.net, go into the free courses section and take advantage of it.
Yeah, do. And I think this one is really strong. I remember recording this one. It felt good. So do go and check that one out. Okay, on to our news story. This is news, but not the most shocking news you'll ever hear. I think we knew this already, Rob, but the stats are really pretty surprising. More than half of buy-to-let lending by volume is now to limited companies. So we know that limited company ownership of property has got a lot more popular over the last couple of years. We know why that is. But looking at the stats, it really is quite amazing. Over half of buy-to-let lending by value is now to limited companies. And of purchases that are completing at the moment, 73% are by limited companies, which is huge. Only caveat, these stats do come from a company called Mortgages for Business, which does maybe make me think their market is a little bit skewed. But either way, it's high.
It is high. And although it's not shocking to us because we've seen it happening ourselves, it's still to see it in black and white in data, although however skewed it may be, it's still like powerful to see like those numbers coming out because it's still quite an immature market. The products available are reasonably limited, but they are improving all the time and the rates are coming down all the time as well. So that's the good news. But as there isn't a huge market there, the fact that the numbers are so big already is really encouraging because it means more and more lenders are going to move into that sector. And we'll see some of the mainstream lenders, I'm sure, very soon operating in the limited company space. They won't want to miss out.
Yeah, exactly. That's the real story. The fact that it's big numbers is kind of interesting because things have changed. But yeah, what it indicates for what's going to happen to that sector in the future is the really interesting bit. Okay, let's get moving on to our topic of the week, the recipe for successful joint ventures. We haven't talked about joint ventures on the podcast for quite a while, nearly 3 years ago, in fact. We talked about joint ventures back in episode 81. There'll be a link to that.
That's quite scary.
It is quite scary. If you go to the show notes for this episode, we'll link you back to that previous episode and the news story and the resource and everything else. So you'll want to check that out. It's at thepropertyhub.net/JV success. But even though we haven't talked about joint ventures for a while, they're still a very hot topic in property. They're talked about all the time. So we thought it was high time that we revisited and got into more detail on this subject. It's also, for even more detail, the cover story in the next issue of the Property Hub magazine. More on that later. So lots to get into on this subject, but the beginning is normally a very good place to start. So Rob, what is a joint venture?
Okay, a joint venture is normally two groups, two people working together and providing different skill sets to get to a more advantageous goal. So let me give you a working example. Often, not always, but often it could be someone with skills or knowledge and someone with money working together. So somebody knows what they're doing. Somebody's got money but doesn't know what they're doing, but the person who knows what they're doing doesn't have money. They come together. They can both accelerate their success. But by no means that's the only scenario. There are many, many scenarios. So why would you do this? Well, generally, you have access to skills resources that you don't have. So some examples could be you have the skills to do a flip and you do a JV with someone who has cash, or you're a builder looking for a project and a partner with a local investor has access to deals that you just can't get your hands on. Or you JV with someone who owns land for a development project. They own the land but don't know the first thing to do with it, but you've got the skills to develop that project. There's so many different variants and so many reasons why people will JV with each other.
Yeah, there are loads of reasons. So that's what a joint venture is, and some situations in which you might want to do it. We're going to get into a lot of detail later on about exactly how to structure a joint venture. But broadly, there are two main types of joint venture. There's a profit share and there's a fixed interest. So the profit share model is probably the one that you're most familiar with. So this is where each of you put in whatever you're contributing. Maybe it's skills on one side and money on the other. You do the project, and at the end of the project, you split any profit that's made in pre-agreed shares. So if the project does well, you're both quids in. If it fails to make a profit, then neither of you gets anything. And of course, you have to agree on what those shares are, but that's the basic model. The alternative to that is the fixed interest model. So this only really works where you've got that fairly typical situation where one partner is putting in money and the other is contributing the time and the skills. So with fixed interest model, the partner who's putting in the money gets an agreed rate of interest, whatever the success of the project. They're just being a lender. It's like a mortgage lender or a bridging lender. They get their fixed percentage of interest, whatever happens. So if the project does really well, the other investor who's putting in the time and the skills gets the majority of the upside. But if it all goes wrong, the investor putting in the money still gets paid out. Those are the two very broad models. So which is best? Well, there is no right answer to that. It depends on who's putting in what. It depends on how sophisticated the investor is. Because, for example, if you've got somebody who's got just the cash and no knowledge at all, it might make more sense for them to have a fixed interest because they're not able to assess the likely success of the project enough to do the profit share. And it depends on many other things as well. So those are the two broad types of joint venture. We'll get into exactly how to structure it later. But first, as I said, there's a lot of talk about joint ventures all the time, and often it's taken for granted that it's a good thing and it's something that you should be doing. So before we really get into it, I think it's wise to question that assumption and look at reasons why you might not want to joint venture.
Well, the first reason not to is if you lack experience. If you're trying to attract somebody with money and you don't have experience, then you don't want to be making mistakes because it'll be the last joint venture you ever do. You want to find a way to be able to build that experience and do some of your own projects first so people will lend to you. And even if you are confident, if you get it wrong, as I say, your reputation's damaged and that's the end of your property career. So you're best to be able to demonstrate you have experience. Now, a big one is you might not just like working that way. A lot of people are very clear on what they want to do already. They've got a clear path and they're just going to work towards it. They don't like conceding control. They don't like having to have conversations about what decisions to do next. And joint ventures can be a lot more work because you're dealing with more people. So for a lot of people, they just won't be bothered with that hassle.
No, exactly. And whatever the upsides, it's not worth it if you're just going to not enjoy the experience and find it really difficult. Another reason why you might not want to is if you don't have to. Why give away a share if you don't have to? If you've got a project that you know is going to be a slam dunk and you can find a way of making it work on your own and you're quite happy doing that, then there's no need to have a partner just for the sake of it. And finally, what I think is a really important reason not to joint venture is if there's no clear exit for the project. I wouldn't say never, but I think generally it's probably not a good idea to hold property for the long term as a joint venture because there's just so much time for people's needs to change, their priorities to change, for you to fall out, for you to have arguments about when you refinance, when you sell. One of you wants to sell, the other one doesn't. There's a lot of room there for things to go wrong. There's quite a lot that can go wrong in a 6-month or year-long project, and that's why you need to structure it properly, which we'll come to. But if you're looking at holding a property as a buy-to-let for years and years, then there's a lot more scope for things to go wrong. So maybe an exception there for close family members or very, very close friends. But in general, I'd say that a JV is more suited to projects where there is a very clear end point. It's a short-term project. You're going to get in, you're going to get out, you're going to make some money, and you're going to split that money.
Okay. So you may have decided this is for you. So how do you find a joint venture partner? Well, you could start with family and friends. Now be careful, your family and friends are more likely to trust you, which is great. Hopefully they should be in that position. But don't abuse that trust. What I mean is if you're not supremely confident in your ability to deliver the project, stay away from this group, this network. Only do this if you are very, very confident. Because if a JV goes wrong with a stranger or a professional partner that you have no relationship with, then you can both walk away and don't see each other again. But if it goes wrong with family or friends, that can ruin relationships. But if you are confident and you have experience, then it's a great network to tap into. And beyond that, the extended network of friends of friends or friends of family members, that one step further. Just extend that network a little bit further out. Again, you don't want to put the friend or the family member in an awkward position by not delivering, but if you have the confidence and experience, great network to tap into.
Yeah, and in your network, you might also have property professionals who you might be able to joint venture with. A property professional should make a great JV partner because they really understand what it's all about and how the project is likely to go. So, for example, I know somebody who ended up doing a joint venture with his mortgage broker. He went to his broker to try and get funding for a project. The broker said, well, actually, this is going to be quite difficult to get funding for, but I can see why this would work, so I'll put the money in. There's also somebody else I know who ended up joint venturing with an architect who got round to look at it, and the architect decided that he could add more value beyond just kind of getting paid for his services and wanted to be a part of it. So there might be people who you already know in property who would want to work with you. And finally, and this is finally for a reason, because this is probably the longest time to pay off, or at least it should be, is people you meet at networking events. So you might meet a property professional or a new potential friend at a networking event. And in time, you could end up joint venturing with them. But we talked about this last time we talked about joint ventures. You, of course, I say of course, but people do it. You did not want to be joint venturing with someone who you've just met at a networking event last week. Recipe for disaster right there. And of course, you don't want to be that guy who's going around pushing business cards on everyone, talking about your project to people you've just met and trying to pressure them into working with you. If you're listening to this podcast, you're not going to be that kind of person. So networking events are great places to build your network, which in the end may result in a joint venture, but not a way of going and rustling up skills or money for a project that you need to do right now. Really, I think that goes for all of these channels. The best way to find a joint venture partner is to not really go and aggressively look and pitch to people all the time. Just talk about what you're up to. So talk to a lot of people, have a wide network, and just talk about what you're up to. If you do that, then people will come to you. And I think that's hard to believe sometimes until you've seen it in effect, but it really is true. If you're going around aggressively hitting people up to work with you, even if it's a great project, they're going to be turned off by that and their defenses are going to go right up. But if you flip it, and so you're just talking about what you're up to, you're kind of talking about projects that you've got coming up or projects that you've done in the past, and you're sharing interesting information about them, not expecting anything in return, then you've kind of flipped it and you'll find that people come to you saying, oh, well, if you ever need any help with that, you know where I am. It makes things a lot easier for you. It makes it less awkward for them, and it's a lot more likely to work.
So the important bit now, how do you set this up? Well, as Rob's already said, get to know your partner well. A quick 5-minute catch up over coffee is not getting to know them well. So build that relationship. Get to know the person that you're going to be working with. Decide on which type of JV to use. As we've already discussed, there are different types of JV. So decide on which method are you going to go for. Are you going to go for a split? Are you going to fix interest? What will it be? Decide on that early on and make sure both parties are happy. And get very clear on who'll do what. So you want those expectations set right at the beginning. That's the time to do it. You don't want people 4 or 5 months in going, well, I didn't think I was going to be doing that. That's where discontent starts to build and even arguments can play out. So get very clear up front.
Yeah, that's so important. It's very easy to sort of say in broad strokes, oh yeah, well, I'll do this bit and you do that bit. But there are so many details. Actually go through, list out every task that will need to be done and decide who's doing what. Because that will lead you on to the next point, which is the financial split. Who gets what? Now, there's no right answer to this. You see the question asked all the time. I get asked this often. Like, I want to do this JV. How much should we each be getting from it? Well, the only answer is whatever is going to make both parties happy and keep them motivated to work on it and avoid anyone being resentful. So the best way to deal with that is to get really clear on what everyone's doing, write it all down, then you can kind of see who is bringing what to the table and therefore how should it be split. If you do that following a detailed conversation about who's doing what, then you're more likely to come up with an answer that seems fair to you both, rather than just to say at the start, oh, we'll split it 50-50. Then later on, it turns out that somebody is doing the vast majority of the work and they start to feel a bit bitter about the whole thing.
The next thing you need to do is plan for what will go wrong. Yes, it sounds a bit pessimistic, but this is a really good exercise to go through. List every doomsday scenario. So this could happen. that could happen, this could happen, and list what you will do with each scenario. So if this plays out, we'll agree to do this. If this plays out, we'll agree to do that. Now, that shouldn't scare away your potential JV partner. That should give them encouragement that you're thinking through what could go wrong and already lining up solutions. I like to call it positive paranoia. Get paranoid about what could happen, but look for the positives that you can draw out of it straight away, how you will solve each issue or minimize the damage. And you'll be a lot more confident, both sides, going into the venture.
So at this point, you've been honest with each other. You've got really clear on who's doing what. You've got to know each other. You've talked about all the things that could go wrong and what you do in those situations. You're nearly ready to actually get this down on paper now. The final hurdle to clear before that is to work out how each party will be secured. So trust is great and trust is important, but if you've got one partner who's got complete ownership over everything, that's probably not a great idea. So there's a few different ways of securing each person's interest in the project. So you could buy the property in joint names, for example. Another alternative is it's bought in one person's name and the other person has a charge over the property, meaning that you can't sell the property or take out a mortgage against it or anything like that without that person's permission. Or you could set up a company with both of you as shareholders and have the company buy the property. There's a few different ways of doing it, all with lots of pros and cons. You'll probably want to take a bit of legal advice, a bit of tax advice, work out what's going to work best, but make sure you come up with a way of securing the project that both parties are happy with. And finally, once you've done all that, you can now get the agreement drawn up by a solicitor. So agreeing it among yourselves is actually the most important thing, I would say. But having a proper legal agreement is important too, just in case things go really bad. Doing all this work yourself first is really important because a solicitor can make something legal and make it correct, but they can't tell you what you should be doing in the first place. And it'll also be a lot cheaper if you can go to them with a list of how you want it to work. So you're basically going to them saying, this is how we see the project working. This is how it'll be secured. This is how it'll be split. This is the plan. These are the responsibilities. And the solicitor can then just draw that up for you, maybe suggesting a few points you might have missed. It's going to be a lot cheaper doing it that way than if you go to them on day one and get them to have to kind of coach you through what you should be thinking about.
So what can you learn from this? Well, take away that a JV is like a marriage. Don't rush in or it'll end up costing you a lot of money. And that's serious advice. Don't rush into a JV. We've touched on that a few times already in this podcast because it's so important. Another thing to take heart from is JV opportunities will come up naturally if you build your network, put that time and effort in, and just share what you're up to. People will approach you. It's just that hard work and just speaking to people. Eventually, the opportunities will start coming to you. But a key lesson for some people listening, if you have no cash and you have no skills, you shouldn't be looking at joint ventures. Now, I know that sounds blatantly obvious, but lots of people try and sell you courses on how to do JVs when you have no cash and you have no skills. And all they're doing is lining their own pockets with cash because they know you've got little to no chance of executing a JV. So make sure you have one of the two. And if you don't have one of the two, go and get it. And then look at a JV if it still makes sense for you. But Rob, we've covered, I think, quite a bit in this podcast. But there's more. There's so much more on this subject.
Yeah, there's absolutely loads. And that's why we've made it the cover story of the next issue of the Property Hub magazine. The great thing about the magazine is we can get into lots of detail that would just make you fall asleep if you were listening to it in podcast form, but it's really engaging written down. And it also allows us to bring lots of case studies into it. So in the cover story this month, it's all about how to have a successful joint venture. It covers all this material and loads more and loads of case studies. If you're a subscriber, well done you. It'll be dropping through your letterbox in the next week or two. If you're not a subscriber already, there is still just about time to right that wrong. So there's a few days from when this episode comes out before the print deadline. So go over to thepropertyhub.net/magazine, subscribe there, and you'll be just about in time to get this issue and all future issues and digital versions of all back issues as well.
But do be quick, you literally have days. But don't worry, if you're listening to this in the future, you can still subscribe to the magazine and get the online version of this. But if you're after the hard copy, take action now. Action like this wonderful individual. Yes, this person, Rob, has left us a 5-star review. Every single week without fail, we've got a 5-star review to to read out. Thank you so much to everyone who keeps leaving them. It's absolutely awesome. Your support is amazing. And this week's review comes from Royce. Great podcast. The two Robs present in an easy-to-understand format, and the content is fantastic. I've been listening for just over a year, and it's helped me maintain my motivation to grow my property portfolio. I'm currently on number 3, with number 4 just going through, hoping to maintain that growth. Keep up the great work. Appreciate the time and effort you put in to provide such a valuable resource. Thank you, Royce. That's a wonderful review.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much. We read out a review every week, but because we get more than one every week, we're a little bit behind. But we will read out your review if you have left us one. And if you haven't, well, maybe you want to have a think about that. Okay, just time before we wrap up for our resource of the week. And I really like this one because this solved a real problem that I had recently. So this is Doctor Care Anywhere, and this is basically an online GP. I don't know what it's like where you live, but where I live, it takes 3 weeks to get a doctor's appointment, which isn't massively helpful. If you're going to be ill, you probably don't have 3 weeks warning, and if you are ill, you probably don't want to wait 3 weeks to get seen. So Doctor Care Anywhere is, well, I guess it's almost like Uber for doctors. Like you go on there, you can make an appointment for literally 10 minutes time, you push a button, and suddenly you're on the phone with a doctor. You could also use the app to video chat with them. You can send them photos. It's really just as good as being there. And you can do it all instantly at home. So hat tip to Lynn at Yellow Lettings. She pointed me towards this one and I've used it a couple of times. And it is fantastic. It costs money. Of course it does. But if you don't fancy waiting or you don't fancy getting down to the surgery, it's really, really good.
That's an awesome resource. This is what makes me so positive about the future. People are always saying how bad things are, but resources like this show how good things are and how technology is progressing things and making things better for us all. So I love this one. And actually, Rob, we talked about our resource of the week every single week. And when we did our last joint venture episode 3 years ago, we recommended Zoom, and we still use that today, which we can't say for all our resources, but we do. 3 years on, still use Zoom.
Absolutely. I'm a huge evangelist for Zoom. Every time anyone mentions Skype, I'll suddenly give about a 5-minute rant about why you shouldn't be using Skype and you should be using Zoom instead. It's just so much better, but I'll stop now.
Yeah, I've heard this one before, Rob. Don't put everyone else through it. Okay, next week, really excited. We've got one of these episodes that is property related. Absolutely. You can use it in a property environment, but you can use it in all aspects of your life. It's building a network of people that you want in your network, but you think, oh, how do I get them to talk to me? It's those type of people who are a bit further on than where you are in a certain aspect of life, but you want them in your network. Sounds hard. Why would they give their time to you? Well, we'll explain why they will and how to do it next week. A really, really powerful podcast, so make sure you listen.
Yeah, that's going to be super, super useful. You're probably doing lots of things wrong that you don't even know that you're doing wrong, and you'll be able to get way better results after listening to that. So that's next week. In the meantime, like we said, go and subscribe to the magazine if you don't already, thepropertyhub.net/magazine. We talked about the joint venture cover story, but there's so much other stuff in there. It's absolutely packed. I've just finished looking through it. It's a fantastic issue. It's always a fantastic issue. So go subscribe to that, and then we'll see you next Tuesday for Ask Rob and Rob. Till then, have a great time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.